Hey, everybody. Happy Wednesday. This is Lee Dury, Deputy Director of Grassroots Operations with Americans for Prosperity Foundation, Florida. Part two of my conversation with Corey DeAngelis. And this week we are joined by Walter Blanks Jr., but of course you can see all three of us. Corey, Walter, thanks so much for joining today's conversation.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, good to be here.
All right, so Corey, you and I talked last week. We're here again today because it's really important to talk about education freedom, school funding, school choice, and having a whole bunch of opportunities for students across the country, across the great Sunshine State, so that they can, have those opportunities and thrive and grow and learn in the environments that best suit them. Next week, you're going to be joining us down here in the Sunshine State in Hialeah, a suburb of Miami, or a small city within the giant city of Miami. Walter, understand you are not going to be able to join us. You're going to be in Dallas for some workshops and training, right?
Yeah, well, I actually live here now, and so the weeks are filling up fast right now. So yeah, I'm gonna be here.
Yeah, totally. Hey, Lee, are you still there? Or are you frozen? I think Lee might be frozen. So Walter, yeah, I wish you could be at the event next week in Miami, but I'll be on a panel with Senator Manny Diaz, who is a huge advocate for school choice out there in Florida. He was the main sponsor on Senate Bill 48 to expand educational freedom in Florida this year. Let's see if we can kick Lee out of here and see if he can come back. Sometimes that works. So I'll have to send him the invite link again really quickly. But Walter, could you give us a little bit of a rundown on what's been going on and your views on school choice over the past year?
Yeah, well, I've coined the hashtag school choice wave, and I think it's very fitting to all of the things that we've seen and all the things that are going on with our current education system right now. So of course we're coming out, we're on the back end of the pandemic, and schools are finally starting to get a hold and figure out what really needs to be done. And so during that time, that kind of interim time, we've seen school choice, sweep the nation. Bills across the country are being introduced, expanded, all to support this idea that we have of supporting students instead of systems. And so I'm very, very proud and excited to see all of this work that it has been going on. And I mean, at this point, people like you and I who are in the space and Lee in the space all the time, right? We just get to kick back now and just see the massive wave come in. And so I'm really excited, and I'm really glad and blessed to be a part of this team.
Yeah, thanks, Walter, for giving us a little bit of the background there. Lee, it looks like your video is working again. Great, we figured it out. But yeah, before we get into that, Walter, since we're on my platforms right now, could you I should have asked you this first, but a little bit of a background and where you come from into the school choice movement, and how you've kind of gotten into it, and a little bit of a background of your school choice story. Or
so I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, tough parts of Columbus, Ohio. And I was in a different public school almost every year, sometimes in the middle of the school year, just trying to figure out where my place was. I was bullied a ton. And there was one time in particular where I came home and had a black eye, buttons missing off my shirt from the school bullies or the group of bullies. And I begged my mom, I said, please do not send me back to that school, right? Like, I'll do the dishes every day. You won't have to yell at me. You don't have to give me an allowance, nothing. Like, I'll do whatever it takes, just so don't send me back to that school. And so I firmly believe that a desperate parent is a very dangerous parent. So my parents did everything that they could to ensure that my education was something that not only I took seriously, but the teachers and the administrators of the school that I was in took it very seriously. And so after some research, my parents found out about the EdChoice scholarship in Ohio, and within months, I was in a different school. And when I look back on it, that's where my passion for learning kind of took off in that new private school that I went to. So I went there from 6th grade all the way through 12th grade, and then got my degree in journalism. And then after that, within 2.5 weeks of graduating college, I moved out to DC, where I get to do this work full time now, and I get to bring up the next generation of leaders, of students who are in the same position that I was in. And recently, I just moved out to Dallas, and taking on new challenges, new people, new experiences, ultimately to really fight for children, right? No one's really fighting for them. And so I'm very fortunate to not only be in this space and support school choice, but I've also lived it, and it's my experience. And so for me, it's definitely personal.
Lee, you want to get back in this?
Yeah, well, I'd love to actually ask now, Walter, with that story, where do you see Ohio these days? I think just yesterday, the day before, I read a new Senate bill being proposed to alter and update some of the scholarships that are available in Ohio. What's your take on things in Ohio and Texas, where you now live?
Yeah, well, to start off with Ohio, I love the state. That's my home. Seems like there's always something going on in Ohio, whether it's lawsuits or new bills being introduced. One new bill in particular that's been really catching a lot of momentum is the backpack bill, and it goes back to Corey's ideas and things of allowing the dollars to follow the student wherever they go. And of course, the new Senate bill, they're reworking the funding formula. All these different things, different aspects are going on in Ohio. But a lot of people are waking up, not just in Ohio, not just here in Texas, but across the country. A lot of parents and families are waking up to the bureaucracy of the public education system, and they are taking control, right? They're taking over their child's education and saying, I'm not happy with where my kid is. And so I should be able to, take those resources, take those funds, even if it's a small amount of those funds, and put them in a place where, as a parent, they feel is the best place. And so we can go on and on about different curriculum ideas and all of these things, but I would much rather just sit back and empower parents and students to make that decision for themselves.
Yeah, I think even with with the schools being closed for over a year, I think families started to figure out that they were essentially powerless, and that the buildings could remain closed and they'd be stuck scrambling, trying to search for alternatives. And they started to figure out that the system doesn't really prioritize them all that much, and that it just doesn't make any sense for the buildings to get the money if they're not providing the services while they're stuck trying to find alternatives. But another part of the conversation, I think, is that with the schools reopening now in so many states, families are also not satisfied with the schools even when they are open. So I think families, the closures kind of woke up so many families, but at the same time, having the option to go back into in-person instruction, that's just the lowest bar possible. And families don't want to just have the option of in-person versus remote. They want to have the option of private versus public versus charter versus homeschool, and the money should follow the child to whatever type of learning environment works best for them.
The theme I'm hearing from both of you, and I apologize about the beeping in the background. I think our power went out briefly, which is what closed my video, and now something is beeping. I don't know what it is, and I'm not going to get up to go look right now because this is much more important of a conversation. You both touched on empowering the students and the parents, empowering the families to make those choices. So in Florida, Walter, Corey, and I touched on this last week in terms of scale. For instance, we have close to 110,000 students who homeschool every year, expecting that to accelerate and increase based on the last 14 months and people being at home. Hundreds of thousands of students in charters, in magnets, dual enrollment programs, virtual programs in Florida kind of lead as a model. That's why we're going to get together in Hialeah next week and kind of celebrate all of these choices, including something I'd like to get your take on, guys. So we have some micro schools that popped up very rapidly and very successfully in Florida. Two micro school founders are going to be with us next week from the South Florida area. What's your view and experience with the micro schools and pods in some of the other states where you've been working and talking?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and just for the listeners, define micro schools really quickly. It's essentially a miniature school where 5 to 10 children typically get together in a household, and families essentially outsource on the process of homeschooling. They economize and pool resources together to make it more economically feasible. And families started to do this in larger numbers right when the school closures started because they wanted to do the homeschooling thing. That seemed like a good opportunity, but it wasn't economically feasible for a lot of families. So a way to make it a little more economically feasible is to pool the resources together in one household. It seemed to be more likely to be more advantaged families taking advantage of this option, whereas other families were just kind of stuck. This is one good argument for school choice, though, or having the money follow the child, because that would allow more families to access the opportunities such as a pandemic pod or micro school. So Arizona actually has a large pandemic or micro school network called Prenda Micro Schools. And the Wall Street Journal actually wrote about Prenda in an article recently called "The Teachers Union's Tiny Little Enemy," because the teachers unions actually had research that they were doing on these micro schools to try to take them down, since it's their competition. And families have been voting with their feet towards these micro schools in large part over this past year. And in Arizona, they have education savings account programs, which is the best form of having the money follow the child, because then you could use it for private school tuition and fees, but you could also use the funding for homeschool-based instruction or micro schools or pandemic pods or homeschool co-ops. And so they already have systems in place in Arizona that allow families to purchase these instructional materials or types of education provisions. And Florida, I'm not sure which of the programs allow you to spend the money at micro schools, but I don't see why it shouldn't be allowed. Lee, I hope you can hear us, but I don't see your picture anymore. Yeah, okay, I can see again. But
sorry about
yeah,
that.
so,
I got a text on how to turn off the security alarm before the police came to our office. That's what the beeping was.
Well, I think
So,
I can't hear it in the background anymore. But to get to the heart of your question is, I think this is a good way to allow more families to access these opportunities is something like an education savings account. And Florida has a couple of education savings account programs already. I think the best way would be to convert all of the programs, the voucher, the tax credit scholarship program, into an education savings account. Maybe that's the next step in Florida, to allow for maximum flexibility and customization on the part of the parents, so they can access all types of government approved education providers.
right, and that's actually as a nice lead into that. So the House Bill 7045 that went through this year did consolidate many programs, make it easier for more families to apply, increased the number of families to be eligible, increased what you could do with the money. So when you've been alluding to homeschooling and pods or curriculum choices, like Walter mentioned earlier, and it is a step. Ultimately universal ESAs, which will allow just all families to be able to have more resources, to have more choices. And again, it's all choices, and that therefore the competition will breed more quality and have more people successful and thrive in the environment they want. Another thing that's sort of a nuance, Walter, you mentioned bouncing around to a lot of schools when you were growing up. I'm not really sure if Ohio has this so much, but Florida is also a leader in terms of open enrollment. About 220,000 students use open enrollment to pick a different public school within their school district, but about 5,000 or 6,000 have traditionally used it each year to go out of district. And that's a kind of uniqueness across the country too, and getting rid of some of those restrictions, right? Like you can do open enrollment transfers only if is what you see in a lot of states, Ours is pretty much open. It's open enrollment across county lines and school district lines. Do you see that playing out, in Ohio and Texas and some of the other states where you're working in terms of a choice that maybe a lot of families don't even know that they really have?
Yeah, and I think definitely in Ohio there was a few open enrollment options, but not nearly as many as there should have been. Especially, and I mean, I was in elementary school maybe 10, 15 years ago. I'm not that old. I'm not as old as Corey, but the main thing about all of this, right? Whether it's open enrollment, whether it's private schools, public schools, homeschooling, all of these different options that we're talking about, is that we need families to have as many options as possible with the least amount of, like you said, Lee, restrictions or conditions. Because it's hard to, if you're a governing body, to put stipulations on, thousands of families that are going to use a certain kind of program. And the big takeaway from that is that, like, each family is different. Each child within a family is different. Like my older brother was the star pupil. Whatever school he was in, he always performed well. And then I was the problem child. Whether it was jumping from public school to public school, there was a couple of charter schools in the mix. My parents homeschooled me for a little bit, which God bless my mother. I don't know how she survived that handling me, but I think when we're having this discussion, that's something that's also very, very important, because there is no silver bullet across the board. And so, like I said earlier, I think it's better. I know it's better to just fight for as many options as possible, and then let the parents, pick and choose based off of what each of their individual children needs.
And I think open enrollment is a step in the right direction towards empowering families to have more educational options, but it's not everything, right? It's essentially like telling families that they're allowed to shop at whatever grocery store they want as long as it's owned by Safeway. Well, that's better than telling me I have to go to the residentially assigned Safeway that might or might not be better than the one that's a couple miles down the street. But still, it's only having one type of education provider as a choice. It's also like saying you can order whatever you want to drink tonight as long as it's manufactured by Coca-Cola or as long as it's orange juice. No, I want every single type of choice that works best for me, and the money should follow that decision. And so that should also be a charter school, private school, or a homeschool option. It shouldn't be limited to government-run institutions. Just like with Pell Grants, we don't tell people that they must use the Pell Grant at a government-run university. It can be a private and even religious university if we would like as well. So we should apply the same logic to K through 12. But I will say open enrollment is better than pure residential assignment where you don't get any choice whatsoever.
Right. And if I rewind a little bit, taking off of Walter's personal story and connection, Corey, last week you mentioned you went to a magnet school in Texas, and apparently we've established you're a little bit older than Walter is. We'll establish I'm a little bit older.
Let the viewers guess. Yeah, guess our ages. Yeah.
So can you talk about that a little bit more? We touched on your family's choice and your enrollment in a magnet school rather than the traditional residential assignment school. But can you elaborate on that a little bit for everybody, and then the benefits of having those choices again, the magnet schools and career academies that are all over the country now?
Yeah, a second ago, you had asked a couple of questions in one question. One was about what school choice landscape looks like in Texas. And I will say Texas, you would think, being a state that historically has championed freedom in other areas of life, hasn't been that much of a front runner when it comes to educational freedom. So Texas does not have any private school choice initiatives, no private school voucher programs, no tax credit scholarship programs, no education savings account programs. So Texas is behind when it comes to the private school choice front and funding students as opposed to systems. They shouldn't be. They should. all states should have educational freedom, but they do have magnet schools, which is the type of school that I attended in high school, and they have charter school options as well, which a lot of people see these two things as synonymous, but charter schools can be privately operated, whereas the magnet schools are still government run or run by the district. And so I had the opportunity to go to a magnet school that specialized in communications in high school. And it was on the same campus as the school that I was residentially assigned to. And so each and every day walking through the halls, I could see the difference in the learning that was going on, in the culture of the two schools. There was more likely to be gang activity at the residentially assigned school, for example, than at the school that I ended up attending. So I think that experience really opened my mind to the importance of school choice and how residential assignment can cause problems in schools, and how not having residential assignment can lead to more competition. And so that's the basic experience. I went to residentially assigned schools all through K through 8. But in high school, my district had 4 different magnet schools that you could apply to. One was in communications, one was in health types of careers, one was in business, and there was another one as well. So I ended up going to the communications school. And yeah, I think that's a great opportunity. I think it's better than being residentially assigned to the school, but you shouldn't be limited to a type of school just based on who owns that school. You shouldn't be limited to government run options. You should also be able to access privately operated options as well. And if homeschooling works best for you, you should be able to use that funding that's meant for you or your children on your children's education, even if it's at home.
Yeah, that's a great story. Thank you for adding to that from last week. I really appreciate it. And I know another bit then to make the Florida connection, which is what I love doing and highlighting Florida as a role model, is during National School Choice Week, we actually talked to several school districts and principals and students who were at magnet schools or pursuing career academy programs. Florida now has a couple drone operator magnet programs available to students. So again, whether that's at a traditional public school or a magnet school or a charter school or where else the students are getting that, we're really expanding those opportunities. And somebody had talked to me recently in the week of kind of what happened for the 10 years where the mantra was every child college bound every day, kind of driving everyone to the academic outcome. So it's really nice to see in Florida that embrace opening up a little bit, that success doesn't mean you get a diploma from high school, you get a associates and then a bachelor's, you have those opportunities to go to career programs. This isn't really something, Corey and Walter, that we've touched on too much, but what's the landscape of sort of more the upskilling or the certifications and competencies with careers versus the academic route that you're seeing and you guys are having conversations across the country?
Yeah, I haven't really looked into the particulars of career and technical education as it relates to school choice, but you can imagine that giving families more options would allow for more students to be able to access these types of alternative programs. It doesn't have to just be the school that you're residentially assigned to, which may or may not have a focus on career and technical elective courses or just overall as a school mission. So I think it could only help to put the money in the hands of the families and let them decide.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. When I first started this work in DC, and Secretary DeVos was rolling out the education freedom scholarships and all of these different mechanisms, it was a huge CTE element in that and focusing on that aspect of it. And similar to what Corey was saying, it's just another opportunity, another option for that kid who's like, maybe I don't want to go to college, right? Maybe I don't want to take the traditional route. And I think that is even more empowering the students, empowering the parents to make the best decision for them, but also giving them the resources to make those decisions and be successful in them. And I have some friends who didn't go to college, who are very skilled workers, make way more money than I do. More often than not, I was like, man, maybe I took the wrong route here. But understanding that everyone learns different, everyone has different paths, and to create a system that is supposedly, you know, one size fits all, right? You go to school, you graduate high school, you go to college, and then right, you can, you know, live the rest of your life as you see fit. It doesn't work that way. It's an outdated model, and now parents are kind of, you know, taking a step back and saying, wait a minute, like there's more to this. Like let's take a step back and look at what we can really do to make sure that our children are set for their future.
Yeah, Walter, I like how you pointed out that one size doesn't fit all. I mean, this whole conversation is just really puts a spotlight on families have different preferences, and children may have different ways of learning or things that they're interested in. That is a really great argument to not stick people into one system that may or may not work for them. And then it also reminds me of how we have these school choice interventions, which generally find, if you look at the research on this, that accessing private school choice leads to a higher likelihood of graduating from high school and going off and graduating from college and enrolling in college as well. But if there isn't a particular measure that we can look at as an outcome in these studies that is the right measure. For example, a lot of these studies look at standardized test scores, but if you're only looking at things like standardized test scores, you may be missing these longer term outcomes like college enrollment, college and completion, or maybe if you're not going into college, you're going into career, some type of career and technical field. And it doesn't really capture the effects on things like reports of safety and just overall satisfaction and involvement with the school. So, I think we should also be careful when we look at look at research that comes out that may find very little positive effects on test scores, because that doesn't capture the entire picture of what families care about. If you survey families, for example, Lindsay Burke and Jason Bedrick did a survey of over 10 or 15,000 families using education savings accounts in Florida. They found that the top couple of priorities were things like safety and the culture of the school, whereas standardized test scores were at the very bottom of the list. So we need to be able to trust families to make those decisions for their own kids, because look, they have so much more information about what their kids need. They care more about their educational outcomes and life outcomes associated with their children than any bureaucrat sitting in offices hundreds of miles away. So the family should make those decisions.
I think that's an excellent point about, as we empower the students and the families and really looking at what success looks like, the tests are just one dimension. I happen to have been a fan as a student of tests because I did well on tests, and I liked school because I did well in school, and so it was a little circle there. But as Walter pointed out, that didn't always play out for my siblings, even though sometimes we had the exact same teacher a year or two apart, or one person's strength is not another person's strength. And having then gone along my journey to become a middle school special education teacher in Florida, again, faced every single day with, how do I individualize this? It's just not possible for every student to be viewed as walking along the same path at the same time to demonstrate the same knowledge on even a quiz I make up, let alone an end-of-year standardized test. So it's just a different measurement needs to be used and embraced. I guess I'll ask this question. I think, Corey, I asked you last week, so let's see what Walter has to say about this. So, Walter, we're in this every day. We firmly believe in creating more choices, more solutions and opportunities for more families, and empowering them. And having the funds follow the students, universal ESAs will break those barriers and give rise to more opportunities for students. So what is some pushback? What is some pushback that you get in these conversations? And then, how do you respond to that? Because people obviously don't necessarily agree with this position that there should be universal ESAs.
Yeah, well, the biggest thing is that most of the pushback and opposition that I get are from people who want to keep the system the status quo. They want to keep it the same way that it has been, because at the end of the day, they benefit, right? It's the monopoly of the public education system. And so when it comes to that, I typically, I've learned really quick in this movement to find my lane and stay in it, and not get sidetracked or veered off on, whatever kind of distractions or smoke screens come up. But I think keeping the child at the center of what we do is the reason for one that we do it, but then the reason that we stay in this movement. And so education reform isn't a sexy profession, right? It's not something that people are like, oh yeah, like I've known I've wanted to do this my whole life. But when it comes to pushback on my end, as far as conveying messages and talking about the importance of it, I often rely on my own story, my own personal experience. Corey and I are kind of like the 1-2 combo. He provides all of the hard numbers and the data and the research, and then I'm the one that's able to take all that and put a face to it, right? And so I often lean on my own story and then kind of pick different data points depending on where I'm at, who I'm speaking to. But at the end of the day, it's the faces, right? It's the mothers that are crying every single night because their kid is in an awful school with no way out. And we often talk about also, in addition, the benefits, right? We've seen that Corey's done multiple studies on the impact of the surrounding schools that have school choices within their district. And competition, breeds excellence, and that's something that we see across the entire country. But then on the bigger end, right, we have to realize what we're battling here, and it's less and less about the children, unfortunately, and it's about those who are in power and control and how they can maintain that. And so once you make that the argument, right, a lot of these things really change. A lot of the conversations really change. And it's because people like us can see through that smokescreen. And so then if you're talking to someone who isn't necessarily in this profession all the time, right, we talk about the benefits, we talk about the value. And even in my own life, like I've done things that I never would have thought that was even possible when I was stuck in those schools. And 90% of it is from my education. And so people look at me and they're like, you've done this, you've done that, you're an accomplished young person. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. But how many more kids are still stuck? How many more kids could have a great life, could be a contributing member of society? And so, like I said, I stay in my lane very, very, very often and stick to the points, not only that I've learned, but that I've also lived.
Walter likes to stay on offense.
Yeah, always.
Tell the positive story of how this is actually helping people, and let them freak out when let the other side freak out when we're winning and states are expanding educational freedom to families. But yeah, I think that's a good approach. And then on the other hand, I get to respond to all the ridiculous arguments coming from the teachers unions, which the main one is that this, school choice sounds great, Walter, but this is stealing money from the public schools, to which I'll respond that the money doesn't belong to the government schools. It belongs to the families. And so you can still take that money to the government-run school if you'd like, but if not, for whatever reason, if it's not working for you, you should be able to take that money elsewhere. And their main argument is essentially a concession that they believe families aren't satisfied with their product. Why would allowing families to have a choice defund the public schools if they're doing a good job? Well, it's because they know that they're not actually doing a great job. And I like to use analogies to respond to these things as well, and point out that allowing families to choose their grocery store doesn't steal money from Safeway. That would be absolutely ridiculous for anybody to say, because we all understand that your funding for your groceries belongs to you. It's meant for your family, even if you're using a taxpayer-funded initiative like food stamps. That money doesn't belong to Safeway. It doesn't belong to Trader Joe's either, or Walmart. It belongs to the family. And so similarly with K-12 education funding, it is meant for educating children, not for propping up and protecting any particular institution, public or private. It belongs to the family, and if they do a good job, an institution, public or private, will be able to take advantage of and to receive those dollars. So school choice doesn't steal money from public schools. Public schools steal money from families. school choice initiatives just return that money to the hands of the rightful owners.
Corey, you beat me to it. You beat me to it.
Well, do you guys work out? Do you work out the catchphrases previously to these groups? Because, you know, Walter, you were talking about really sort of the top-down control mentality of a system versus helping to create a bottom-up thriving opportunity system for people to make those choices. And, you know, Corey kind of alluding to that too with and it is a paradigm developed over decades or the last century, right? Is the starting point the system, or is the starting point the consumers, customers, people, individuals, students in this case? And that really drives the way you look at everything. And I really like the way you guys both work through that. I think you're a great 1-2 punch, like you said. Walter, I know, and Corey, you know, we had some tech issues and we changed platforms and streaming services and dealt with a weird power surge here in Orlando. So Sunshine State apologizes for having a thunderstorm today. Real quick, as we wrap up, and Corey is going to be joining us next Wednesday in the Miami area. Walter, some closing thoughts again about really what you wanted people to take away from the school choice discussion and the education freedom and opportunity discussion.
Yeah, first off, thank you so much, Lee, for having me on. Corey, it's always good to see you. Just the biggest thing is that school choice, if we can figure this thing out from a wide range of different things, it has the potential to change the life of a child forever. And then in turn, change what I often refer to as generational curses, right, within a family. I've done things that my parents have never been able to do, could never imagine doing. The first time my mom was on a plane was to DC to fight for school choice. And so I'm starting, even in my siblings, starting to see a little bit of a, pioneer, trailblazer kind of attitude just from seeing me out here doing this work. And so when it comes to school choice, like I said, there's no silver bullet, but it has the power to change the trajectory and the life of a child forever. And I think that a lot of times we get stuck in the weeds with political points and data and all of these things. But I try to think about the kid who's just like me at home right now, stuck in a terrible school, begging for a way out. And if there's anything that I can do to fight for that kid, I'm going to do it. And so I think we need to reframe the focus a little bit and keep the strategy and the mission and the messaging towards the child. And from that point, we can't lose, not at all. And so it might take some time. Like you said, it's a system that has been in place for hundreds of years. And but I think we're on the right track. And I think that we just keep plugging away, keep coming up with data points, keep raising up the next generation of leaders in this ed reform movement. We'll be just fine. And so I'm really excited to be along for the ride and learning as much as I can from you guys.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. Hey, Corey, I'm sorry, you got to follow that up with some closing thoughts.
Yeah, I'll just say Walter's right as usual. And look, the education system exists to meet the needs of students and their families, not the other way around. So we should get our priorities right and fund students, not systems. And that's the real takeaway here. We need to center everything on what the whole freaking system is supposed to be about, which is the kids. And for far too long, every single conversation was about, well, how is this going to affect our monopoly? Well, who cares about the monopoly? It's about the kids and not the adults in the system and their paychecks. So we need to have someone sticking up for the children. I think that's where we come in. And I think more and more people are figuring out that, look, there's no good reason to fund closed institutions when you can fund students directly instead, particularly when we already do this with so many other taxpayer-funded initiatives, even when we're looking at higher education with Pell Grants and the GI Bill and other taxpayer-funded programs where the money goes to the student. They can pick public or private universities. We do the same thing with the federal Head Start program for pre-K, where the funding goes to the family and they can choose public or private, religious or non-religious providers of pre-K services. We do the same thing with Section 8 housing vouchers, with Medicaid dollars that can be used at Catholic hospitals that are private. And with all of these other programs, the funding goes to the person and they have a choice in the matter. It's only when it comes to the in-between years of K through 12 education that people actually get all up in arms about it. And it's because it threatens their monopoly, and it's an entrenched special interest that profits from getting people's education dollars regardless of their choice. And so they're going to continue fighting to keep that monopoly. But I think that the more and more we point out that we already fund others directly with so many other sectors and levels of education, it shouldn't be all that much of a problem when it comes to K-12 either. And I think people are starting to figure out that the only difference here is one of power dynamics, that choice is the norm with just about everything else and every other type of level of education, but choice threatens that monopoly with K-12. It's about time we get those priorities right and fund the kids, not the system.
Get the priorities right. I'll take that as a sort of partial closing comment, because actually it's really just a continuation. We'll get part 3 of Corey talking about all of this next week live in Hialeah in Miami-Dade County. We do have the registration links up. Seating is limited at Miami-Dade College in Hialeah, expecting some really great guests in addition to Corey. Corey, thanks so much for these conversations. Walter, we've got to get a time for you to come join us in Florida. It's hurricane season, but I think you'll be safe down here if you come on down and keep talking with us. Thanks for joining so much, guys.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.